If you have missed any of our webinars, you can catch up by watching on the previous webinars on our YouTube channel. And at the end of this discussion, the presentation, there'll be a chance for you to be able to make comments and also ask questions in the chat. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today, Vanessa Rakolota. Vanessa's interest for understanding how bats respond to climate change was ignited during her honors acoustic project, where she learned how land use and vegetation structure shaped bat activity. This experience opened her eyes to the complexity of ecological systems and the urgency to protect them. Now a master's student at the University of the Witwatersrand, her project explores the use of biophysical models in predicting the thermoregulatory responses in bats occupying artificial roost boxes and how they might respond to rising temperatures. A key takeaway message from her research is that while some species aren't at risk currently, others are already nearing their thermal limits. This highlights the importance of incorporating physiology into conservation planning. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen and allow Vanessa to take us through the presentation.
Okay. All right. Just checking that this is visible to everyone and everyone can hear me.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so thank you, Chris, for that introduction. And just before I get into my talk, I would like to say thank you to the Bats Without Borders team for inviting me to give this talk on the work that I've been doing during my master's. So, okay. As climate change accelerates and the planet is not only just getting warmer, we are seeing more frequent and intense heat waves globally. And on this figure over here, we are seeing that countries that are in the tropics, such as Mali, the temperatures are going up to 48.5 degrees. That was in 2024. And in 2022 in Australia, temperatures were up to 50.7 degrees Celsius. And while this is expected, or this has been predicted to be happening in more the south, we are seeing these heat wave records in unexpected areas like Canada and Great Britain. In Canada, in 2021, there was a report of a heat wave at 49.6 degrees, in Great Britain at 40.3 degrees. So with these rising global temperatures, the animals experience changing environmental conditions, and so this affects their water and energy needs, further affecting their survival. And in light of these reports of heat waves, we have seen mass die-off in flying foxes in Australia. That was in the news, those were big headlines. But this is not the only case of mass die-off that we're seeing. So there's been a global spread in the occurrence of these events. And most recently, there was a report of heat wave related mortality of Lactulus noctula in Italy, where air temperatures were above 30 degrees. And in South Africa, there was a record of about 58 Wahlberg's epilated fruit bat carcasses that were found at multiple sites in KwaZulu-Natal after maximum air temperatures had reached 43 degrees. And another report is from Cambodia, where more than 500 bats died over a 2-week period, during which the maximum temperatures exceeded 42 degrees. So what we see here is that when air temperature becomes too high, the bats become acutely heat stressed and performance declines are observed, resulting in mortality. But before I get into the meat of my talk, I just want to draw your attention to this diagram over here, which forms the basis of our understanding of thermoregulation in homeothermic endotherms. So the main goal for homeothermic endotherms is to keep a constant body temperature. And usually in the thermoneutral zone there, these are a range of temperatures where there's optimal, well, these range of temperatures are optimal for physiological processes. And we see that metabolic rate is minimal and constant within that zone. But when the air temperature below the lower critical limit, which is on this side, we see that there's an increase in the metabolic rate to generate heat, and so that the animal is able to maintain a stable core body temperature. And on the other end, where this the animal experiences conditions that are above the upper critical limit, the metabolic rate also rises as the animal will be activating physiological mechanisms such as panting, sweating, so that it dissipates the excess heat and prevents hypothermia. So when the temperatures then continue to rise, the animal then faces a trade-off between avoiding hypothermia and preventing dehydration. And since many heat dissipating mechanisms such as panting, sweating, and licking then lead to water loss. And another threat that bats are then experiencing is that there's land use changes that are currently happening. So in the natural environment, the ability of animals to cope with heat stress often depends on suitable microhabitats such as burrows, tree crevices, which then provide thermal refugia for the animals. But when these refugia are being lost due to land use changes such as intense agricultural practices and urbanization, we see that this loss of these thermal refugia potentially impacts the population sizes, abundance, and diversity of the species that use the cavities for escaping the heat. So with a focus on Poland, where historically forests covered the majority of the territory of the country, but over time deforestation has resulted in little natural forest being available. And of this little forest that is there, pine monocultures are replacing them. So further, this shows a loss in trees that have cavities. So as a solution, the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment in Poland, that is responsible for overseeing measures related to conservation, the mandate that when natural forests are cleared, that then there's an alternative roosting habitat that is provided for bats, and that is through the use of bat boxes. And these bat boxes come in different shapes, different materials and dimensions. There's some wood bat boxes, ceramic, but the most commonly one that is used in Poland is the one that is made out of woodcrete. And on the use of these bat boxes in Poland, the common recommendation is that they, as it pertains to orientation, is that they receive at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight, preferably southeast or east facing. Now, while this might be optimal in winter, there's a rising concern of these boxes actually becoming ecological heat traps in the summer. So what Zen and Matt and Michal did was, through the use of thermologists, they measured the roost temperatures in sun-exposed roosts and shaded roosts and outside these roosts. And with this figure that presents their findings, the red line represents the outside temperatures, the white circle represents the shaded roost, and the black represents outside. It represents the sun-exposed roost. So what we see here is that the shaded roost temperatures track those of the outside, and the difference between then the sun-exposed and the shaded roost is that the maximums of the sun-exposed roost are reaching temperatures of up to 44 degrees Celsius, while in the outside and also in the shaded roost, temperatures are up to like 31 degrees. So in these bat boxes, while many bat species occupy them, these form part of those species that occupy the boxes. So Pipistrellus stigmaeus, Pipistrellus pipistrellus, Pipistrellus natuzzi, and Nyctillus nyctilla. And essentially the story will be revolving around him. In addition to what Zenon and Co did, is that they also measured the evaporative water loss and body temperature in the 4 species by increasing in a lab setting, by increasing temperatures from 27 to 48 degrees. And on the graph of evaporative water loss against air temperature, we see that the rate of water loss is constant for temperatures ranging from 27 to up to around 35, which is like presented in the red box over there. And from that point, we see a sharp increase in the evaporative water loss. And I just want to bring back the figure that we spoke about earlier. So that area over there is what we see happening over here. What they also did was to determine the heat tolerance limits of the bat, which is the air temperature where when approaching high levels of hypothermia, and at this point, we see signs of physiological and behavioral stress. And beyond this air temperature, then bat function becomes impaired. And these heat tolerance limits were ranging from around 44 degrees to 48 degrees. And the body temperatures at these limits range from 43.9 to 44.5 degrees Celsius, with the species-specific ones being 44.2 degrees for Pipistrellus natuzzi, Pipistrellus stigmaeus, 44.1 degrees, Nyctillus nyctilla, 44.5 degrees, and Pipistrellus pipistrellus, 43.9 degrees. And with these findings, they form the source of inspiration for what I set out to do, which is to quantify the risk of lethal hydration and hypothermia in the 4 European bats that occupy these roosts under current and future climates. So to make these predictions, I made use of NISHMapper, and NISHMapper is a package that is built under R, and it comprises a suite of open source programs that are used for mechanistic niche modeling on the base of biophysical principles. So in its environment, an animal will experience heat gain through solar radiation, convection, and conduction, and heat loss through evaporation or respiration. So what we use these mechanistic niche models for is to understand the relationship that the environment and the animal has in terms of thermodynamics. But before I could get to the point where I could make these predictions, there's a series of steps that I needed to follow, and the first one being model validation. I needed to validate the endotherm model, and as a first step to that, I parameterized the endotherm model, and this was essentially to build the bat as a third ellipsoid in computational space. And what this involved was getting morphometrics and physiological values of adult bats. So this could then be modeled in the computational space. And I'm very, very grateful for the team at NCU University in Poland that provided me with their data for the body mass of the bats, and they also determined their sex and took the images that I could use then to measure body length, shown there in orange, body width over there in green, body depth from the back up to the chest over there, and also measurements of fur depth, which is from the tip of the hair until the base of the skin. And these measurements were then further averaged for each species. And some of the physiological data that then went into the parameterization included the basal metabolic rate and oxygen extraction efficiency of the species. The second part that I needed to validate was the microclimate model, where I compared outside air temperature measurements that were recorded using eye buttons to model air temperatures. And these air temperatures were collected over a month. And once I had validated some microclimate models, then I could use the microclimate to model the temperatures inside the roost box, and then further making evaporative water loss and body temperature predictions in the roost. The only different thing that I did with the future predictions was to specify that this was now at a high risk climate change scenario. So that is business as usual climate change. And the last step, yeah, as I said, was to run the end of the model again with the roost box conditions to get evaporative water loss and body temperature. And from then I could get the evaporative water loss as a percentage of body mass and maximum body temperature. So the outputs from the validation of the end of the model, these, so just to say what is what on the figures, the red dots are empirical data, and the black line over there is what the model, or what these are the model outputs. So there's a consistent trend across all the 4 species, but I'm going to start here with Nactylus nactyla, and the general pattern of the modeled values tracks that of the empirical data in both the body temperature and evaporative water loss. And in Bacillus natuzi, the trend in modeled evaporative water loss values follows that of the empirical data, but there's a slight difference here in comparison to the other species in that there is a range between around 34 degrees to about 39 degrees, where the modeled values are about 0.02 above the empirical data. But this does not really affect the overall trend of water loss in the species. And just to say again, the body temperature predictions tracks that of the empirical data. And here again in Bacillus, you see the pattern of the modeled evaporative water loss values and the body temperature following that of the empirical data. And lastly, in Bacillus pygmaeus, you see that the pattern of the modeled evaporative water loss values and that of the body temperature follows that of the empirical data. So with this consistent trend that I got from the validation, I was then able to conclude that the end of the model was able to capture the evaporative water loss and body temperature responses of the male bats of all the 4 species. With the validation of the microclimate model, so on this graph here, in black is the modeled outside temperature, and in red is eye button temperature, which is essentially empirical data outside the bat boxes. And so what I did to check whether really this is true that they track each other, I did a correlation between the model values and the empirical data and got an R-squared value of 0.7. And did the same for the roost box temperatures, where I modeled the temperatures inside the roost boxes and then compared it to eye button temperatures that were temperatures from eye buttons that were placed in these roost boxes. And furthermore, did a correlation between the modeled air temperatures and the empirical data and got an R-squared of 0.7. So these high R-squared values gave me the confidence that the model will be able to predict roost box conditions. And so I did that for the entire summer of 2021. So this graph shows the modeled roost box temperatures for the summer months in 2021. The orange dotted line is the heat tolerance limit for Nactylus nactala. The green line is heat tolerance limit for Pipistrellus natusi, and the red line is Pipistrellus lignaeus and Pipistrellus pipistrellus. And from then on, I also did predictions for the future climate and did the risk box temperatures over also that summer period. And the general trend here is that we're seeing that it's warmer in the roost than it was in 2021. And that is shown by more days where the heat tolerance levels are being reached in comparison to 2021. And so I used these predicted temperatures to then predict the thermal risk that the bats will experience in the bat boxes, as these are the actual conditions that the bats will experience. And that is what is shown over here. The risk of lethal dehydration in Nactylus nactala. Excuse me. And we see that there is 1 day over there at a moderate risk. Sorry, let me just go back a little bit. This, for the next few graphs, so the next 4 slides, it's going to generally show body mass loss as the black dot, and the pink shows moderate risk of dehydration, and the darker pink shows high risk of dehydration. So just to get back in the current predictions, that is in 2021, there was a prediction that the bats will experience a moderate risk of dehydration for 1 day and a high risk for 1 day also. And then in the future, we see that there's more days, that's 1 to 3 days, where there's moderate risk, and there's 2 days at high risk. In Pipistrellus natusi, the risk of lethal dehydration under current prediction is that 3 days under moderate risk, 2 days at high risk, and in the future there's about 8 days at moderate risk and 7 days at high risk. In Pipistrellus pipistrellus, there is, under current conditions, we see no risk, and under future predictions there's a risk. So it was like 1 day over there where the bats experience moderate risk. In Pipistrellus pygmaeus, there was 2 days at moderate risk in current predictions and 1 day at a high risk. And in the future, there's like close to 5 days at moderate risk. As pertaining to the risk of lethal hypothermia, the triangle, the maximum body temperature, and the light pink shade shows the body temperature range at heat tolerance limits, and this was then the moderate risk, and the darker pink shows high risk. And in Nactylus nactala, presently, in current conditions, we see 8 days where there's moderate risk, and in the future there's 21 days at moderate risk and 3 days at high risk. In Pipistrellus natusi, in current conditions, there's 9 days at moderate risk, and in the future 28 days of moderate risk. In Pipistrellus there's 9 days at moderate risk and 28 days at moderate risk in the future. So 9 days in current predictions and 28 days in the future. And lastly, in Pipistrellus pygmaeus, there is, in the present conditions, 10 days at moderate risk, and in the future, 29 days at moderate risk. So the general findings are that currently bats that occupy these bat boxes are at risk of lethal hypothermia and dehydration. And we see that this risk will increase in the future. And so this then supports the idea that these artificial roost boxes can become ecological heat traps in summer. So what needs to then be done is to revise conservation recommendations. So more studies then to investigate alternatives in terms of both the construction and the placement of the boxes. So just before I end off, I just want to say thank you to my incredible team of supervisors, Dr. Matt and Dr. Shannon, and some honorable mentions, Dr. Zen, who provided the empirical data for these species, and Professor Michal and Anna in Poland, who provided the field measurements, and lastly, my lab mate. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for that interesting and informative presentation.
Hi, Vanessa. I do have a question, and thank you very much for the talk. That was very interesting. That was very nice. So I wanted to ask, you spoke about the risks of hypothermia and dehydration. What were the box temperatures at these levels of risks?
So the bad box temperatures typically range from 43 degrees to about 48 degrees in current conditions. And then in future conditions, they went up to, I think, 68. I think I saw 58 degrees. Yeah. So these are quite high temperatures.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. And there's a comment in the chat which is saying, is it possible to share the slides just for enriching my knowledge base? Kudos for such a wonderful presentation. I think the presentation was being recorded and it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, so people then can go back to watch again and again. If there are any other questions from the audience, but as we are waiting for that, I think...
Yes, I've got a question. Vanessa, hi, I'm Sue from Australia. I've done a lot of heat stress work with flying foxes, but I don't know that much about microbats with heat stress. But my understanding is that in Australia, a lot of our microbats use torpor to manage heat stress. Like they'll often just go into torpor on hot afternoons in just normal weather, but that they can survive heat stress using torpor. And the other thing is that some of them have been found to like tolerate temperatures up to like 45, 50 degrees and not bother thermoregulating, just saving energy. So I was just wondering, in your studies, did any of them use torpor to manage it? The heat?
Well, these are predictions. So there wasn't, I didn't do the experimental work, so to say, but I know that Nutella does torpor. So yeah, that's what I know of.
Okay.
I don't know about the other three using torpor. Yeah, but yeah, we didn't in the models, so to say, we didn't account for torpor.
Okay, thanks. And do you know if they were actually do they have other behaviors for thermoregulate? Like, is all that evaporation just from respiratory water loss, or are they licking their wings and doing that sort of thing as well to help evaporation?
Yes, they do that. They do lick the wings and all of that to dissipate the heat. So yeah, that also is done. But yeah, as the model has its limitations, so to say. So in the model, those I guess behavioral well, okay, let me just put it like this. So the bat starts in a minimized heat position, so wings closed. and it only then opens up the wings in the model that is. So it does not then flap and all of that. But the part about licking and all of that, we had into the model. There was we just a bit nervous. We did account for water loss through licking. This was the surface area through which heat can be dissipated. So that is the eyes around the nozzles and all of that. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So
Thank you.
if there are any other questions,
yeah,
I think
hi.
there is.
Hi,
Yes,
can I ask
please.
a question? It's Jane here from South Africa.
Yes,
Thank you
please,
very much
Jane.
for the talk, very informative.
Yes,
And
Jay.
can you tell me on the bat houses, what sort of design were they? Did they have air vents? Do you have sort of what thickness the outside casing was?
No, I don't generally know that, but
Okay.
when we modeled the box as it is, we just used its weight. That's what I knew. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Jane. There's
Thank you,
another
Dennis.
question in the chat, I think from Rachel. Thanks for the presentation, Vanessa. I can imagine there's a real lack of data. Do you have any advice on where we could collect this data, or if other regions do this already?
Yeah. So there hasn't been a lot of respiratory data collection, especially for bats. There's cases in there's a case in Canada, there's Poland, there has been in South Africa. Yeah, everywhere essentially we do need that respiratory data so that we can then train these models.
Thanks very much for that response. I think as we are there, any other questions from the audience? I think for me, it was also good to see how the empirical data was fitting the modeled values for both the evaporative water loss and also body temperatures. How did you choose the parameters that you used to validate your endotherm model? Maybe someone also is thinking of doing something similar. How did you choose the parameters that you used when validating the endotherm model?
So the inputs that go into the endotherm model, is that what you're asking? Chris?
Yes, the input, like the parameters that you put, I think you showed us they were getting like the body length, the width, and also the other measurements that you were putting in the model. How did you choose those?
Yeah. It's what the model requires. So the model requires that I put in the body mass, I input the body length, the body width, and the body depth, and fur, depth, hair length, the skin temperature also, so that it's at the best possible mimics that bat within that computational space.
All right, thanks very much for that. Are there any other questions, contributions, or comments
Hi
from
guys.
the audience?
Hi everyone. It's Simon from South Africa. Hi. Vanessa,
Yes,
thank you for
Simon.
your talk. Chris and Vanessa, is there anybody in the Southern Hemisphere that is, so we do Chile, Argentina, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, that's going to be a champion of modeling the most appropriate back box design for the Southern Hemisphere for microbats? So I mean, I know the bigger fruit and foxy type bats that don't roost in the typical box that we get from the pet shop, the garden shop, the specialist shop, or find the instructions from bats whichever instructional back group is suggests that we've designed. Is there somebody who's taken on a challenge? Is there a young master student or a young PhD candidate who's going to have a look at how our existing understanding of bat boxes have failed and what we're going to do, as we do with any species in temperate climates, wherever it is, whether it's humans in houses or dogs outside or bats in boxes, to find the failings and to find the biases in our assumptions of what's acceptable.
Yeah, no, I currently don't know anyone that has taken up that challenge. So unfortunately, I don't know. But yeah, so obviously we wouldn't follow the same thing that is being done in the temperate regions. So imagine then a woodcrete bat box being placed in full sun for up to 6 to 8 hours in a day. And that I can imagine the bat would experience a very severe heat stress. But currently, I don't know of anyone that is taking up that challenge.
Thanks very much, Simon, for that question, and Vanessa for the response. I think there are a number of students also on this call, and I think that is a challenge like where future research should focus on, to look at how we can best optimize the bat boxes. There's a question from in the chat from Lorraine. Lorraine, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and just ask the question.
Yeah, hi everybody. Hi Vanessa, thank you for the interesting talk. Very much needed. Vanessa, the beginning slides, there was at the introduction the 2 slides of the bat die-offs that have happened. Were those die-offs that associated with bat boxes?
The ones that I reported, no, those were just in their natural environment. But the one study in Italy where it was the Nactulus nactuli, yes, that was in bat boxes. But the one in Cambodia, the bats were the ones that roost in roofs, and the one in South Africa, Warburg isolated fruit bats roost in trees. There's been research in Australia which basically found that boxes need to be made of thicker, more insulated material. Yeah, so that is thermally buffered roost. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And I think in relation to Simon's question, there's an addition from Sue that there's been some research in Australia which basically found that bat boxes need to be made of thicker, more insulated material. I think I'll try to find a link to that. I think Sue has suggested that. I think, Vanessa, if you could also just comment on when we are looking at how best the predictions, especially for the future for the different bat species, looking at both the risk of hypothermia and also the dehydration rates. The number of days was increasing, but different for the different species. How well, which category of bats are we supposed to be more worried? Is it that the smaller the bat, the more risk it is at risk? Or how was the relationship between the body weight, the body mass, and the risk to either dehydration or hypothermia in the future?
I did not go to the point of quantifying the species-specific responses. So yeah, but generally there was Pipistrellus pygmaeus, which is our smaller cat, then having more days, and well, just looking at the poise, then it experienced more days where in comparison to the other.
Thank you very much for that, Vanessa. I think this is a very important topic, especially in the face of global warming. I think as we are suggesting to use bat boxes, especially in urban setups, it's very important that we do more research and understand how these then affect the bats. Are there any other questions from the audience? Anyone would want to unmute and ask a question? Okay, it seems we don't have any other questions in the chat. I think at this point then would want to thank everyone who was able to join today's webinar, and also very special thanks to Vanessa Rakolota for that very excellent and informative presentation. I think you can see from the audience and also the comments that are coming in the audience, I think this is a very important topic, and well done for doing this work. Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you again next month on the 23rd of July.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.